Okay, hello and welcome to the MSDynamicsWorld.com Spring 2013 BI and Reporting webcast series. I am Jason Gumpert, and joining us for today's event is Brandon George. Brandon is a Microsoft Dynamics AX MVP and Senior Technical Architect. He's also the Director of the BI practice at Sunrise Technologies. He's also a popular blogger on the topics of AX and BI in the Microsoft stack, and Brandon is also a longtime supporter of MS Dynamics World, so we are really happy to have him back today. As we get started, I just want to add a couple of notes. We invite you to add your feedback and ask questions today during the event. There are a couple ways for you to do this. First, you can use the Q&A tab that you see on the right side of the screen. There's a Q&A tab. You can also use the chat. We also invite you to share your thoughts and questions on Twitter. We're going to use the hashtag MSDWBI to sort of tweet what we're learning and to listen for your feedback. So without further delay, please allow me to welcome Brandon George.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, and definitely been a long time supporter of Microsoft Dynamics World. You guys do a great job of getting information out to the ecosystem and serve a critical part in that. So, as you stated, today we're going to focus on BI and specifically the topic related to AX 2012 R2 and what I say is the power of the personal BI side of things. So, with that, today's agenda, we're going to look at an introduction to the BI semantic model. Get right into examples using PowerPivot and Power View out of Excel, as well as Power View with an AX 2012 experience. Look at how these artifacts are built and who are the targeted consumers and producers typically of such artifacts. And then looking at next steps, moving from personal BI and how that builds towards team BI and beyond. So with that, let's get started with an introduction to the BI semantic model. This is a Microsoft graph, what you see here, and it represents the spectrum that is the business intelligence or BI semantic model as represented by Microsoft. You'll see starting from the left-hand side of the spectrum, you've got personal BI. Personal BI is typically targeted towards ad hoc reporting. This would be power users consuming data and from multiple sources, including out of AX, out of cubes, consuming that with the targeted client of Excel. So not that Excel is like the system of record, but it's more becomes a first-class citizen in the presentation layer. And this is enabled by two technologies within Excel. We're going to look at Excel 2013 today with this, and that's PowerPivot and Power View. Moving from there, in the BI semantic model, you see team BIs in the middle. This is the collaboration point. Typically what you see is users, power users who own the data, creating personal BI artifacts, collaborating and sharing those through SharePoint. There are aspects around SharePoint like Excel services and PowerPivot and Power View that enable different consumers even without the Office client. And then the final piece to this BI semantic model, which builds up into the organizational BI side of things, where scale needs to take place. So this is your traditional BI developer roles where you have analysis services, reporting services, and integration services. The idea with the BI semantic model is we're trying to improve how the reporting paradigm exists at customers so that no longer is it an issue that you're waiting on IT to create reports, which is still needed at that scale level, but instead the personal and BI spaces can help feed into that organizational BI space. So with that, let's continue on to the examples. What you see here pictured, first we're going to look at AX 2012 and OData, look at PowerPivot, as well as visualizing data. So PowerPivot is used to mash data, to work with data from different sources in an Excel format, being able to work with pivot tables. Power View within Excel and also in SharePoint is meant to visualize data, to quickly take data that has been modeled, whether that be in PowerPivot or in a cube, and be able to target quickly compelling visualizations that are generated by power users as well as can be IT staff. So let's look at some of these examples. I'm going to move to sharing my VM image. So as it's coming up, what we first see pictured here is we're actually inside Excel 2013. You'll see that I've already got created 2 tabs. The first tab, what we have here is we actually have data coming out of AX through PowerPivot through OData feeds. This data is actually invoice amount information spread across customer groups, across the city that we're interested in seeing for the sales information, for this invoice information. We've also got some conditional formatting, so you see the data bars here. This is just Excel itself. When I have highlighted areas, you can add data bars. So how do we get here? How do we get to this pivot table and be able to look at it? What we see here is we have a field list, just like any other pivot table would have, except we're working with it from PowerPivot. PowerPivot is actually the source in which is powering the pivot table field list here. You can see I have amounts as values, cities as I've got columns, and rows I've got customer group. Any one of these fields that we've got modeled now can be used. So I could switch out customer group for the roles, for example, by removing the field. And I could add payment terms or sales groups. And again, it starts to change the data and how we're looking at it. So this is all within Excel client itself. We're all living inside Excel at this point. But again, how do we get here? How do we get to this point where we're working with AX data as a power user within Excel from PowerPivot? So we need to start back and look at AX 2012 itself. Looking inside AX 2012, you have a module called Organization Administration. Here we have in the Setup area a section called Document Management and Document Data Sources. And clicking on Document Data Sources, a form similar to this would pop up. This is where we're able to come in and actually add an AX 2012 R2 query references or custom query references. If we look at the 3 that we've modeled, we've got customer invoice address, customer invoice lines, TVs only, and then list of U.S. states. These 3 are targeted for a PowerPivot consumption. And looking at this, being an administrator and not a developer role, I can actually edit this query like I would in any other query use when you're reporting within AX or when you're looking at a grid view, and actually supply date information, item information, specific information to limit the scope of the query that's being used that will be targeted for PowerPivot. Once these queries are activated, you can see an Activate button here, they're ready to be used and consumed as OData feeds from within PowerPivot. This is where we come back into Excel. So the role that would typically set up those queries, there's obviously an organizational scale role there, the organizational developer, that someone would create a query inside the AOT that could be targeted first. From that point, an administrator or someone that had access to those document data sources could then administrate and activate and change the filtering of those queries within AX itself. From that point, someone who is typically a power user, who's used to working with Excel formulas, who's used to working with pivot tables, would typically come in and can target PowerPivot by clicking on Manage from the PowerPivot tab. That launches into a design space that you see similarly here. This would be blank if we started from scratch. And we could target then, since we're looking at AX data through OData feeds, we're not going directly to the database. We're actually going to the application layer. And it's important to understand this point. Going into the application layer through AX as OData means that we inherit any contextual security that's been modeled, as well as translation, enumeration, language, and so forth. So I'm within PowerPivot. It's a part of Excel 2013. It's just a tab. You can see that I have Get External Data from a data service and from an OData feed. Selecting this is the target for the AX instance that I happen to be on. And I'm able to then see, based on my security routes, I'm able to see the queries that are applicable to me that I can use as OData feeds. If I didn't have routes to specific queries, they would not show up in this list. Again, we've targeted 3 queries, so it's an invoice address information, but the main measure is out of the invoice lines, connecting to the invoice address information, and then list of states out of AX. In doing this, we're actually able to then, through these 3 queries and through PowerPivot, we can model the relationships between these queries within PowerPivot dashboard itself, and I'm in diagram view to be able to do this. You see I've highlighted already a relationship that we have set up. Similarly, for the measures that we care about coming out of invoice lines, you can see that I have a relationship between the order account and the invoice address information from the other query. This gives us a more complete view of the invoice sales amount related to the customer around customer groups, address information, state, region, and so forth. Having this completed, you could typically then start with a pivot table or pivot chart, as we have shown in this first tab. So this is a pivot table that we started here, and we've chosen again to look at this based off customer group value 10 and 30 out of the Contesto demo data set, as well as the cities that are being sold to. Since I made the change flipping between payment terms and customer group for looking at this information, I need to come back and add my conditional formatting. This again is a quick visualization within the pivot table to be able to highlight areas that are selling best, cities that are selling best across customer groups. So we'll notice that customer group 30 is obviously doing the best for us based on the grand total, with San Diego or with New York and Irving being tied or close for first and second. Taking this to the next step, we can also look back at the PowerPivot design space. And it's not only limited to AX data, but you can also, this is a good point to where we say MASH data, in that we can bring in external data sources here to help complete our scenario as well. You could think of, it could be from cloud data sources, it could be from other databases, it could be from Excel files. The idea is that within this design space, within PowerPivot, we're able to mash data from multiple resources, join that data, and actually start working with that data in an ad hoc way. This artifact then could be published and shared with SharePoint to start enabling Team BI. But this is just one part of it. The other part of it around personal BI is around creating compelling visualizations. What we see here is the same data that is modeled inside PowerPivot, the same queries that are modeled inside PowerPivot, with a slightly different view. What we've enabled is we've enabled looking at this through Power View as a map chart. We've taken the order amount and crossed it with state information, or, excuse me, city information. And as well, we've got a column chart that shows by state the same invoice amount. You can see by clicking within Power View, both of the charts are interactive. So as I click on Irvin, or as I click on Astoria Wells, or if I click on California, you can see both charts are interactive. Now how do we get here? Looking at this, it's very simple to create our Power View designs. So we could easily check and take out the state, for example, from the fields, and we could change this again to customer group if we wanted to. Well, let's start from scratch and let's create a new Power View grid to get a feel for how this works. So I'm going to simply add an invoice line, invoice amount. I'm going to drag and drop the field to my view source. Now that I have this, I'm going to take and change the look and view again. And we can look at state as well again here. Wrong field, sorry about that. So simply adding and looking at this data, we've already got information that we can look at and we can filter and sort by. But again, Power View is more about creating powerful visualizations without a lot of effort. So now that we've got our targeted data, I can come up here to Visualization type and start looking at the information. So instead of a column bar or a pie chart, I can quickly change this information in view. And now, as I select information, you can see that I didn't have to do anything extra in order to enable these visualizations to interact with each other. It's inherited through Power View and through the use of Excel 2013. You'll notice that the majority of the time for this personal BI experience is actually spent within Office itself. Excel, again, being the primary ad hoc tool for creating personal BI artifacts. Another way of looking at Power View is interacting with and from AX itself. This requires AX 2012 R2, or Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 R2. I've got a simple menu item within the sales and marketing. This menu item, it could be placed as a button on any form. This is actually going to launch the Power View design experience that we've just seen via SharePoint. Doing so actually targets a cube that is outside of Dynamics AX. It's actually not an internal cube of Dynamics AX. The cube that we're going to target here with this launching is actually going to be a cube that is based on the data warehouse that we're building at Sunrise for demoing business intelligence. You can see I have a very similar design space. And so the consumer, again, at this level, could most likely end up being a power user, someone that understands and owns this kind of data, as well as an IT professional wanting to create web parts that could be placed on Role Center pages. So here we have a cube. This cube has information. It's focused on sales. So I'm going to add order amount. I'm going to increase the size of my text so you can easily see what we're targeting. Now that I have order amount, you can see I have a multitude of possible dimensions to slice this order amount with. Again, this is targeted for a specific vertical around consumer packaged goods, apparel, and so forth. You can look and see, though, that there are also some common hierarchies and common dimension sets that are applicable to several different verticals. I'm going to take the order amount and look at it by category. And then from there, I'm going to pick a ship date. You'll notice, again, we have calendar date information as well as fiscal date information. I'm going to select fiscal year to look at this information by. And you'll see quickly how the table starts to build out. I'm able, again, to choose and quickly create visualizations based on this information that is a stacked column chart. And you will see that it is very interactive, just like we saw in Excel. These can then not only be placed and consumed as we're working with them as we are now, but also as Role Center web parts. To help show this further, you'll see that we actually have Power View Web Parts document library within. This is a part of Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 R2. It comes out of the box. You'll see that we actually have created several of these Power View web parts to demonstrate the possibility of what you can do with the power of AX, the Microsoft Stack for BI, and correctly modeled data. Here we have the same information that we were looking at before. Slightly different by material, material and type, order amount by month and style for fiscal month, and then SKU information. Again, as we're able to click on information, or able to click on the different charts, we'll see that the other elements interact well with each other. Very little effort is used to create this once the data model is correct. And you can imagine, again, someone working with this data, working with Cube data, or working with data from within AX 2012 out of OData feeds, who understands that data, who owns that data, whether it be sales, supply, purchasing, inventory, and being able to model and quickly create reports that are meaningful and help drive real insight with little effort. You can also imagine someone creating a visualization, as we see here, possibly getting ready to do a presentation. One of the very neat things about this Power View is I can actually export this to PowerPoint. And in doing so, I have an option of how this is going to be saved. And you can see very quickly the power of using the entire Microsoft stack, including Office 2013, to enable a full story around personal BI, including enabling working with PowerPoint. You can see that the interactions, even though I'm not in Power View, the interactions inside PowerPoint carried over. So these are a couple of examples of personal BI being used with AX 2012 R2. And no other required software is needed. It is AX 2012 R2 and the Microsoft Stack, which includes Office as being a first-class citizen in the presentation layer and consumption of data from AX and other sources. Moving back to the presentation, what we've seen, again, to recap, is consuming data out of AX 2012 at the application layer. From there, working with visualizations within Excel from Power View, consuming that same PowerPivot data, as well as jumping into AX 2012 with the same Power View experience within SharePoint, consuming a more structured, scaled-out sales cube information. If you have Office 2013, if you purchase Office 2013, or if you have SharePoint, then you have Power View. Power View is a free add-on, as well as PowerPivot. So what are the next steps from personal BI? Moving from here, again, keep in mind that not everyone is a Power user, not everyone is a BI producer. There are typically more BI artifact and reporting artifact consumers than there are producers. But our next steps from personal BI would be to save those Power View visualizations, to save those pivot tables that are based on PowerPivot data, so that they could be consumed from within Role Center page web parts, as you see pictured in this slide. The other two, what we're trying to enable is that it doesn't take a lot of technical depth, once SharePoint is set up correctly, to be able to publish such personal BI artifacts and collaborate with them on SharePoint with team and work groups. This includes, with the advent of SharePoint 2013, more clientless consumers, meaning that you do not need anything but a web or a mobile device to be able to consume these published Excel web parts or these published Power View visualizations. The goal that we're trying to achieve here is to make a more engaging experience for the users that actually own the data so that they can help feed into the BI story that we're crafting for customers. I'm going to turn it over to a question and answer session. Looks like we have a few questions coming along here. So it looks like we have a question around the recording. So I think the recording will be posted.
Yep, that's right, and we will send out an alert to everyone who's registered to let them know when that's available.
Okay, so I think there's another question. Does it apply to nav? So from Power View and PowerPivot and working with data, nav would just be another data source that could be incorporated into mashing data within PowerPivot within Excel, as well as Power View itself creating visualizations. So technically, yes, it does apply to nav, though I have to admit, I'm not someone that's ever done it within nav. Another question came across asking about SharePoint Enterprise to enable the full scope of what we've seen. What we actually saw today with Personal BI, demoing PowerPivot Power View, you do not need SharePoint Enterprise. SharePoint Enterprise actually enables some of the other things that were mentioned around Excel services and some of the clientless with SharePoint 2013 modes of consuming such artifacts. But being able to create such artifacts, you actually need Office 2013, and PowerPivot and Power View come as part of it. To launch the Power View design source with AX 2012 R2, you actually need AX 2012 R2. But Power View comes as part of that SharePoint experience. Another question came. It's around, can the solution work with AX 2009? So AX 2009, technically, you could use SharePoint 2013 and PowerPivot and Power View with AX 2009. You couldn't consume as an OData feed out of AX 2009. So you wouldn't be able to inherit the application layer benefits that we first talked about. But you could consume an AX 2009 instance as if it was another data source. So that would mean a slightly different scenario in modeling security to get this enabled correctly. But beyond that, then technically, yes, you could actually use PowerPivot and Power View at that point to create BI artifacts that help complete a full story.
Brandon, if I could jump in for one moment. There's several questions coming in that are being sent privately to the host, and if you send a question in via the chat, just make sure it's sent to all the presenters. Brandon, I'm sort of passing those over to you. You might start seeing a list of questions coming through.
I see that. So let me come back here. How do you fire Power View from the menu on the AX? Okay, so one question was, how do we fire Power View from a menu in AX? We can actually come and look at this. It's really straightforward. There's a framework that exists with AX 2012 R2. I've actually got a blog post on this that walks you through exactly how to do this, if you'll look up Power View on my blog. But in extending Power View, you see that I've actually only got two mods that I have to make, really, within AX. I've got a menu item and then where I want the menu item to be launched from. That could be a form or a menu itself. And looking at this, We have a specific class that we're targeting now with AX2012R2 called Power View Reporting. And we have the same kind of labels and help text that you would expect in other menu items. And a simple parameter with sunrise cells. This is actually pointing to that Power View source that we saw before, where I went to launch some of our existing reports that we've got developed. So this comes out of the box, this Power View reports for any Enterprise Portal and Role Center enabled instance of AX2012R2. You'll see that we have these specifically targeted data connections.
Brandon, are you trying to share your screen right now?
Oh, yes. I should have done that. Good point. Sorry about that. Let's start that over again. Share. Now let's start this over. We've got the Power View location that comes enabled with any AX2012R2 instance. This is where the Power View reports are stored for Enterprise Portal consumption. You'll see that there are actually cubes that we're targeting. These are mostly out-of-the-box AX2012R2 cubes, but we've also got, for example, our Sunrise Cells cube that actually is a cube that lives outside of the realm of Dynamics AX as far as being built within the AX framework, but it's conglomerating and bringing multiple sources, including AX data, into its cube structure. But we're still able to target it. We're still able to target this from within AX and from within the Power View experience. So if you'll see, I'm inside AX 2012. There's only a simple menu item that I've got. I've got the label and help text, as well as the object, which we're targeting Power View reporting, and a simple parameter that says what connection, what cube connection do I want to target, and it's the exact name that we have stored on Enterprise Portal. Once I have this in place, I can move this menu item to a form or a menu anywhere, and when I click on it, that's what gives me the experience of targeting these Power View visualizations for that specific cube. Let's see here. Let's come back to some of the other questions. How many data sources in addition to AX can you pull in for analysis purposes? The technical answer is infinite possible data sources. The rational answer, the reasonable answer is what makes best sense for what you're trying to target. So you can bring in multiple line of business applications, multiple database sources, multiple database types within PowerPivot to mash data together. It can be flat files, it can be data feeds, it can be data sets that live on Azure Data Mart within the cloud. All of these are possible, but the real question is what is feasible and what makes sense for what you're trying to achieve. Another question was for the PowerPoint interactive real-time. The PowerPoint interactive is real-time. It will refresh when you have the interaction mode on within the PowerPoint presentation. It'll refresh for the cube if it's within the same domain space and it can connect to that Power View control that you see. That's what's actually being displayed in PowerPoint is the Power View control. So if I have that PowerPoint presentation, I email it to somebody to where that PowerPoint, that Power View control can't connect to its actual source, then it'll be static and it will not be interactive. Question when it came around PowerPivot add-in for Excel 2013 versus Excel 2013, Excel 2010 versus 2013. So PowerPivot is an add-in for 2013 and 2010 of Excel. Power View, if you have Office 2010, if you have Excel 2010, you have to use SharePoint as your Power View experience. With Office 2013, both of them are combined as just tabs within Office, within Excel. Another question came around PowerPivot and its results for auto update. This is actually a good question around the cubes and so forth. So PowerPivot, what we consumed, it was actually data out of AX. It was direct data out of AX through the application layer. So there are actually no cube involved. You're actually technically creating that cube within the PowerPivot design space. You just don't realize it. There are options when you take and create and promote the PowerPivot artifact to SharePoint. When you're using SharePoint, you can actually schedule to refresh those PowerPivot, those Excel documents. You can actually schedule, just like you would a cube, to refresh its data. You can actually schedule the PowerPivot documents within SharePoint to refresh its data on a regular interval, on a nightly interval, whatever it may be. Another question came, and I lost it. Hold on one second. What is the difference between Power View and PowerPivot? So PowerPivot, again, just to be clear, PowerPivot is meant to consume data, possibly from one to multiple sources, to where you can join that data into an in-memory database within Excel. It's very powerful, this in-memory database, and it can process millions of rows at a time within a single workbook very effectively. But it's the data mashup point. You're creating more easily a cube structure, so you can do pivot tables from, or you can do compelling visualizations with Power View. That's the difference, and that PowerPivot is where you can create these data mashups and you can consume data without having to understand how to create an actual cube within analysis services, and do it in an ad hoc manner so that things like pivot tables or Power View, which is around visualizations, can be used to visualize such data. The question came back around external cube data, the menu item for launching into Power View for the external sales cube. Yes, that was a slight customization as I reviewed. There are out of the box, if you go to, with AX2012R2, if you go to like all vendors and you go to the general tab, you'll actually see Analyze Data button. Anywhere you see Analyze Data button AX2012R2 across the forms, it uses the same thing that I showed with the custom sales cube that actually lives outside of AX. So the cubes that you model within AX, within the AX framework, as well as outside of AX, both can be targets for the information worker within the AX experience. Right now, as far as AX is concerned, related to Office 360 and SharePoint Online, it is not supported. So you could technically consume, for example, a PowerPivot. Within PowerPivot, you could consume a list or a business data catalog list or some other type of information out of Office 365 inside PowerPivot and mash that data with on-premise AX data. But this was targeted with AX2012R2, and currently it is not supported around Office 360 and SharePoint Online versions. That's coming with later feature pack and more specifically AX7. All right. Let's see what other questions we have. Can you make Power View reports on the AX standard cubes? That is correct, you can. And let's see here. Performance like when running Power View reports from within AX custom queries. So performance is always always something that needs to be considered when you're working with any BI and reporting scenario. The idea around the PowerPivot and Power View and the focus of what you're trying to do is ad hoc in nature. So if you're needing to consume a lot of data and a lot of information, typically you start with that scale side then, because you've already identified a lot of information within that cube structure or within a query that's been modeled by an IT resource. Once that's created and once that's done, then it should perform well. There is a scenario you can get yourself into, though, that if you have rots, you could pull millions of rows of records. So that's why that modeling exercise is so important. When it comes to anything around BI and reporting, the tools actually are the easiest things to deal with, and the most important thing to get right is modeling of the data and access to that data. That would include topics like performance. So what we showed around SQL Server 2012, this is the latest version of the VM from Microsoft for AX 2012 R2 that has Power View enabled, and it has the needed aspects for SharePoint and SQL Server around PowerPivot. It is released so that you can actually do this same scenario, same software that's installed on-premise in production. So it is supported now. All right. Are there any other questions?
It sounds like you might have made your way through all of them.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, let me make sure to put back my information up here. I can send the slide deck to anyone. Please feel free to write down my email address, and I will make sure to get it to you. What I have on this resource is just understanding the natural flow of the BI semantic model. It is a blog post that I created that helps walk through, again, a little bit deeper and high level as well for some of the connecting points from personal, team, and organizational BI as it relates to Dynamics AX 2012 R2. Well, thanks, Jason, for having me today.
Thank you, Brandon. Great presentation as always, and thanks for taking the time to answer so many questions from our audience. And I do want to actually thank the audience too, and thanks for attending today, for bringing so many great questions to the table, and for helping have a great conversation here. So as I mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded. We'll let all of you know when it's available to view online. And thanks again.